They say children's laughter can light up a house. But when Daniel Cross returned from years abroad, he didn't hear laughter. He heard silence. He saw his daughters hunched together in a storage room, a single candle trembling over stale bread. Shadow, his battle-worn German shepherd, stood stiff beside him, ears trained on the woman in the doorway. Evelyn Hart, polished, graceful, and utterly wrong. She spoke as though this was all a game. But Daniel saw what Shadow saw. Two little girls living in fear too deep for words. That night, a promise was born. A father would fight again, not against soldiers, but against shadows in his own home. A dog would stand guard, ready to give his life once more, and two children would learn what it means to be truly safe. It began with silence. It ended with a bark strong enough to carry them all toward hope. The road to Cedar Hollow curled like a ribbon through the snowbound hills, each bend carrying Daniel Cross deeper into a place that had once been home, but now felt almost like a memory. The world was hushed beneath winter's weight. Pines draped in white, branches heavy, the sky a slate-gray dome pressing low against the earth. His SUV hummed steadily through the silence, tires crunching over frosted gravel, the engine's warmth a fragile barrier against the cold pressing from all sides. In the passenger seat sat Shadow, his German shepherd, 7 years old now, his coat dark sable, streaked with silver at the haunches. The dog's left hind leg carried a stiffness, a scar of Kandahar, where shrapnel had torn through tendon and bone. Yet his posture was alert, ears twitching, eyes sharp, scanning the passing trees, as if the forests of Virginia held the same dangers as distant battlefields. Shadow had saved Daniel's life once, dragged him through smoke and dust when a compound wall collapsed. Ever since, the two had been more than soldier and dog. They were bonded by blood, survival, and something deeper that never needed words. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the odometer ticked past the last familiar mile marker. Today was supposed to be simple. A surprise. His daughter's 6th birthday. He hadn't seen them in nearly 2 years. Months bled into months overseas, where sandstorms replaced snow and silence meant ambushes rather than peace. In every letter he'd written but never sent, in every voicemail that cut off before the beep, he had promised them a party when he came home. A real one. Balloons strung across the porch. Vanilla cake with too many sprinkles. Laughter that didn't echo off concrete walls. He pictured it now as he drove. Lily's shy smile breaking into giggles when she saw him at the door. Grace tugging at his jacket, asking if he brought presents. He even rehearsed how he would knock, 3 light taps, the way he used to when they were toddlers, so they'd squeal, "Daddy's home," before he even stepped inside. He wanted to give them that again. Wanted to erase the silence that had crept into their phone calls, the way Lily's last words had been only a whisper. "I miss you, Daddy," before someone had taken the phone away. Shadow shifted, leaning his head briefly against Daniel's arm as if sensing the storm of thoughts. Daniel reached over, rubbing the dog's ear. "We're almost there, boy," he murmured. "Almost home." But even as he said it, a flicker of unease crossed his chest. Home. The word felt foreign. His late wife's laughter had once filled that house. Her best friend, Evelyn, had stepped in afterward, all grace and compassion, offering help when Daniel was too numb with grief to refuse. Within months, kindness had turned into permanence. Marriage. A household reshaped. He had told himself it was stability for the girls, even if love never came. Yet in the quiet of desert nights, lying beneath a foreign sky, he had wondered if he had left them in the wrong hands. The town came into view, Cedar Hollow, tucked between forested ridges and rolling fields now buried under snow. Smoke curled from chimneys. Holiday lights blinked faintly on porches. Life went on, as if nothing had changed. Daniel slowed as he passed the diner, where he'd once shared milkshakes with his daughters. The schoolyard now deserted, but scattered with frozen footprints. Every sight tightened his throat with memories of what he had missed. First days of school, loose teeth, bedtime stories. The milestones had gone on without him, leaving shadows where he should have stood. He pulled onto the long, iron-gated drive of the Hart estate. Snow crunched under his tires. The house loomed ahead, tall, pristine, with its shutters freshly painted a lifeless cream. Once, it had been his wife's family home, filled with warmth. Now it bore Evelyn's name, her order, her silence. No streamers, no balloons, no signs of birthday cheer. The windows stared back blankly, their glow muted and cold. Daniel cut the engine. The silence pressed in. He sat for a long moment, gloved hands resting against the steering wheel, heart pounding louder than the ticking of the cooling engine. This was supposed to be a homecoming. Instead, it already felt like stepping into enemy territory. Shadow's low whine broke the stillness. The dog's breath fogged the window as he leaned forward, eyes fixed on the house. Ever the soldier, Shadow knew tension when it seeped from walls. Daniel exhaled and forced a smile, though it felt heavy on his lips. "Come on, Shadow. Let's give them the surprise of their lives." He opened the door. The cold hit him like a blade, sharp and biting, filling his lungs with air that tasted of pine and iron. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. He adjusted the collar of his coat, tugged it higher, and walked slowly toward the porch. Shadow padded beside him, steady despite his limp, each step measured, protective. As they neared the front door, Daniel slowed. He could see faint shadows through the window, flickers of movement. His heart leapt. Maybe they were inside, waiting. Maybe balloons were hidden behind the curtains. Maybe Evelyn had simply been discreet. He rehearsed his knock again, fingers flexing. 3 light taps. A pause. Then their voices. He lifted his hand, knuckles hovering inches from the wood. Shadow sat at his side, head tilted, eyes never leaving Daniel's face. In that gaze was loyalty, but also a question. "Are you ready for what you'll find?" Daniel's breath fogged the glass. He lowered his hand slowly, a sudden unease anchoring it down. Something wasn't right. The silence inside was too deep. No laughter. No rustle of wrapping paper. Just the muted hum of a house that had forgotten joy. He turned instead, his boots crunching as he followed the old stone path around the house. It was a path he remembered well, one that led not to the front porch, but to the storage shed tucked behind frosted hedges. Memories stirred. Summers, when the shed smelled of grass clippings. Winters, when his daughters played hide-and-seek between its walls. Shadow stopped halfway, ears twitching. His body stiffened. A soldier's stance, low growl rumbling from his chest. Daniel froze. That sound meant only one thing: danger, or at least something deeply wrong. And then he heard it too, a faint humming, barely a breath, not laughter, not celebration, something else. Daniel's stomach knotted. He knew then that whatever waited on the other side of that door wasn't the party he had imagined all those lonely nights overseas. He reached for the handle. Shadow pressed close, a silent sentinel at his side. The surprise was waiting. But it was nothing like the one he had rehearsed. The hinges groaned as Daniel pushed the shed door open. A draft of stale air brushed against his face, tinged with dust, damp wood, and something faintly metallic, like rusted nails left too long in the cold. The single bulb overhead flickered weakly, its light casting more shadows than it dispelled, and then he saw them. Two small figures sitting side by side on mismatched chairs in the center of the dim room. Lily, her hair pulled into uneven braids, fingers curled tightly in her lap. Grace, slightly rounder in the cheeks, but hollow-eyed, her head tilted toward her sister, as if they drew strength from being pressed close. Between them sat a chipped porcelain plate, and on it, a single crust of bread. A pink birthday candle leaned precariously in the dry slice, flame wavering in the draft. They were whispering. Their voices were so soft that Daniel almost thought he imagined them, small breaths, forming wishes that clung to the air like fragile threads. The sight slammed into him harder than any battlefield ambush. His throat constricted. This was their birthday celebration. After 6 years of life, after months of his absence, this was what they had been given. Silence, cold, and a crust of bread. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't move. He simply stood in the doorway, body frozen, heart pounding so loudly, he feared the girls would hear it. Shadow pressed against his leg, whining low, sensing his turmoil. Lily noticed first. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. The candlelight reflected in pupils too large. She flinched, as though she had been caught stealing. Grace followed, shrinking into her chair, hands curling protectively around the plate. Neither spoke. Neither moved to smile or run into his arms, as he had imagined countless times on lonely nights abroad. Daniel's voice cracked when it finally came. Lily. Grace. The names sounded foreign in the cold air, as if the walls had forgotten them. Grace's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her small fingers reached blindly for Shadow, who stepped forward, pressing his head gently against her knee. Only then did her shoulders ease a fraction, her hand tangling in his fur, as if anchoring herself to something solid. Before Daniel could take another step, the sharp rhythm of heels clicked across the patio tiles outside. The sound was precise, unhurried, each step like a measured note in a song meant to unsettle. Evelyn Hart appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a beige silk robe that draped her figure with calculated elegance. Her black hair was pulled into a low, perfect bun, not a strand out of place. In one hand she held a steaming cup of tea, in the other her phone. She paused when her eyes fell on Daniel, and for the briefest flicker, something cold crossed her porcelain features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a smile so polished it seemed painted on. "You're home," she said smoothly, as though she had expected him all along. "I didn't think you'd be back this early." Daniel's jaw clenched. He gestured to the room with a stiff sweep of his hand. "What is this?" Evelyn's gaze shifted to the girls, then back to him, still smiling, though her eyes remained flat. "Oh, this?" She stepped gracefully inside, crouched beside the plate, and lifted the bread between two manicured fingers as though it were beneath her. She insisted on lighting a candle. Children have such wild imaginations. She let out a soft laugh, dismissive, and set the bread aside. "I was just about to bring them inside for dinner. You've caught us in the middle of a game." "A game?" Daniel's voice dropped lower, thick with disbelief. He looked at his daughters again, pale, silent, their little shoulders hunched as if bracing against words that could cut. "Does this look like a game to you?" Evelyn stood, smoothing the silk of her robe with slow precision. Her expression never faltered. "You always dramatize, Daniel. The girls are perfectly fine. You don't see how much I've done for them while you were gone." She glanced at the girls, her tone softening in mock affection. "Sweethearts, tell your father we were just playing." Neither child spoke. Lily's eyes darted to the candle stub, then down to her lap. Grace pressed her face into Shadow's fur, trembling. The silence was deafening. Daniel stepped forward, fists tight at his sides. "That's not playing. That's survival." Evelyn's smile thinned, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head in feigned pity. "You've been gone a long time, Daniel. Maybe you've forgotten what it takes to raise children alone." "They're sensitive, yes, but that doesn't mean they're neglected. You left them in my care, and I've given them stability you never could." Her words struck like barbed wire, wrapping tight, meant to guilt. But Daniel had faced interrogation before. He knew the tactics of control, and he saw through her charm now as clearly as he'd see through smoke on a battlefield. His daughters weren't stable. They were afraid. They weren't playing. They were enduring. He crouched slowly to their level, ignoring Evelyn's sharp intake of breath. He reached out a steady hand toward Lily, who hesitated, then looked up at him. Her eyes brimmed with something he hadn't expected. Not just fear, but pleading. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice so faint he barely caught it. Daniel's chest burned. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here." Grace clung tighter to Shadow, who sat rigid, eyes locked on Evelyn, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Evelyn's mask cracked for the briefest second, annoyance flashing across her features before she smoothed it again. "You can't just walk in and take them, Daniel," she said firmly, voice dropping its sweetness. "Legally, you don't even—" "I don't care about legal," Daniel cut her off, his voice still now. He rose, his presence filling the small shed. "I care about my daughters blowing out a candle on a slice of bread in a freezing storage room. I care about the silence in their eyes. That ends tonight." The air shifted, heavy with a line drawn. Evelyn didn't move to stop him, but her eyes narrowed, calculating. Daniel didn't flinch. For the first time since stepping onto the property, he felt clarity. He placed a hand gently on Lily's back. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured. "Let's go get your sister." Lily stood slowly, her hand still trembling in his, but she didn't let go. Grace followed, clutching Shadow's fur, the dog rising with a protective stance between them and Evelyn. The birthday candle flickered one last time before sputtering out, a thin trail of smoke curling into the air like the ghost of a wish never spoken aloud. And in that moment, Daniel knew. The celebration had ended, but the real battle had only begun. Daniel lowered himself slowly, his knees pressing against the cold wooden floor, until he was eye level with the girls. The air inside the shed was thin, and each breath clouded faintly in the cold, but he spoke with a gentleness that carried warmth. "Lily. Grace." His voice softened, a tone they hadn't heard in months, but one that still carried the weight of belonging. "It's all right now. I'm here." Grace's small body trembled, but her grip on Shadow tightened. Her fingers burrowed deep into the thick fur at his neck, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that threatened to collapse. Shadow didn't move. His stance remained protective, but his eyes, steady, watchful, shifted between Daniel and Evelyn, as though he knew this moment was more dangerous than any battlefield he had patrolled. Lily didn't answer. Her thin braids hung loosely against her shoulders, her lips pressed tight. Yet her eyes told a story her mouth couldn't shape. She stared at him, gaze wide, fragile, filled with a question that pierced him deeper than any wound. "Will you leave us again?" Daniel swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. "I should have come sooner," he whispered, though the apology wasn't enough. He extended his hand, palm open, not forcing, just waiting. "You don't have to say anything. Just know, we're leaving this room, tonight." A sharp laugh broke the fragile silence. Evelyn stepped forward, the click of her heels loud against the shed floor. "Really, Daniel," she said, voice syrupy but strained at the edges. "This performance is unnecessary. You've been gone for 2 years. Do you think you can walk in, say a few words, and everything changes? You don't have custody. You don't even have standing." Daniel didn't look at her. His focus stayed on Lily and Grace, his hand still outstretched. "You're not alone anymore," he told them. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Evelyn's smile faltered. For a moment, something sharp and unguarded flickered across her porcelain face. Frustration, maybe even fear. But she quickly rearranged it into that same calm veneer, the one she used like armor. "Girls," she cooed, stepping closer, her robe whispering across the floor. "Sweethearts, your father is tired. He doesn't understand how we do things now. Tell him you're fine. Tell him this was just for fun." Grace shrank back, pressing herself tighter against Shadow. The dog growled low, teeth barely bared. Evelyn froze mid-step, her eyes flashing at the sound, before she smoothed her features once more. Daniel rose to his full height, his frame filling the dim space. And his voice no longer carried gentleness but steel. "You've had your chance, Evelyn. Whatever excuse you want to dress this up with, it ends now. They're coming with me." Her eyes narrowed, the mask cracking just slightly. "That's not how this works," she hissed, the sweet tone stripped away. "You don't get to vanish into deserts and wars, then storm back, expecting to reclaim what you abandoned. These girls are mine as much as they're yours. I raised them. You controlled them," Daniel shot back. "There's a difference." The room felt smaller with every word, the air tightening, the candle smoke still lingering like a ghost between them. Lily shifted then. With a slow, hesitant movement, she reached for Daniel's hand. Her small fingers brushed against his palm, trembling but purposeful. When her eyes lifted, they were filled not with fear, but with a silent plea. A plea so raw, it cut through every defense he had built during years of war. Daniel closed his hand gently around hers. That tiny connection, fragile as it was, became the anchor he had been searching for. His resolve hardened. "We're leaving," he said firmly, his gaze never breaking from Evelyn's. "Right now." The words landed heavy, final. Evelyn's face stiffened. The flawless calm she wore like silk faltered, revealing the faintest fracture beneath, the tightening around her eyes, the twitch of her jaw. For the first time, Daniel saw her not as the elegant savior she pretended to be, but as someone whose power was beginning to slip. "Daniel," she said, her voice lower now, almost dangerous. "If you walk out that door with them, you'll regret it. The law is on my side." Daniel stepped closer to his daughters, placing one steady hand on Lily's back, the other hovering protectively near Grace. Shadow moved with him, his body forming a barrier of muscle and loyalty. "I've faced worse odds," Daniel said, his tone cold but sure. "And I've never lost a fight worth winning. This This is the only fight that matters. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the hum of the weak bulb above and the faint hitch of Grace's breathing. Then Lily pressed herself into Daniel's side, her small body leaning into his. Grace followed, dragging Shadow with her. Their silence was enough. Evelyn's mask cracked wider. The smile was gone now, replaced by a sharp, brittle expression that looked almost like rage, but was laced with disbelief. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Daniel tightened his hold on Lily's hand and motioned toward the door. "Come on, girls. We're going home." As they moved, Shadow kept his gaze locked on Evelyn, his growl low and steady, until they reached the threshold. The door creaked open, letting in a rush of cold winter air that smelled of pine and freedom. Behind them, Evelyn stood frozen, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. The first fracture had appeared in her perfect facade, and Daniel knew more would follow. But tonight, the silence had finally broken, and in that break, hope stirred. The night air hit them like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, as Daniel ushered his daughters through the back door and toward the waiting SUV. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, each hurried step echoing in the silence of the estate grounds. Lily clung to his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Grace shuffled beside Shadow, her other hand buried in the shepherd's thick coat, as though afraid that if she let go, the world might swallow her whole. Behind them, the storage shed door stood ajar, its dim bulb flickering like a dying heartbeat. Daniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel Evelyn's eyes on them, her presence heavy, waiting for a moment to strike. The SUV loomed at the end of the drive, half buried under a thin crust of frost. Daniel opened the back door quickly, guiding the twins inside. The interior light spilled across their pale faces, highlighting the weariness etched into their features. They slid into the seats without protest, small bodies stiff, eyes darting like sparrows trapped in a storm. Shadow leapt into the vehicle after them, settling between the girls with a practice motion. His weight was solid, grounding, his body forming both shield and comfort. Grace immediately buried her face into his neck, inhaling the scent of fur and safety. Daniel shut the door and rounded to the driver's side, breath clouding in the frozen air. And there she was. Evelyn stood on the porch, robe wrapped elegantly around her frame, her silhouette framed by the golden glow of the house. Steam curled lazily from the teacup she still held, as if she hadn't moved at all since he'd taken the children. Too calm, too composed. Her lips curved in that practiced smile, but her eyes glittered like shards of ice. "This isn't over," she called, her voice carrying through the stillness. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even loud. But the certainty in it slithered through the night air and lodged deep in Daniel's chest. He met her gaze across the distance, jaw tight, but said nothing. Some battles didn't need words. Sliding into the driver's seat, Daniel started the engine. The SUV coughed to life, headlights carving two pale beams through the darkness. Snow had begun to fall harder, thick flakes sweeping across the windshield, melting instantly against the glass before reforming into streaks of ice. He pulled onto the drive, tires crunching against frozen gravel, and felt the tension ease slightly as the estate shrank in the rearview mirror. Yet Evelyn's figure remained fixed in his mind, that calm certainty promising a war far beyond this night. Inside the SUV, the girls sat silently, buckled in but rigid. The soft hum of the heater filled the space, battling against the chill. Lily pressed her forehead against the cold window, eyes following the falling snow. Grace still clutched Shadow, who had stretched out enough to press against both children at once. His ears twitched, alert, but his steady breathing filled the car with a rhythm that calmed where words could not. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, hands firm on the wheel. Snow swirled in the headlights, making the night feel alive, as though the storm itself conspired to hide their escape. "Are we really going?" Lily's voice broke the silence, fragile and uncertain. She didn't look at him, her reflection in the glass ghostly against the storm. Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes," he said softly, steady but kind. "We're going somewhere safe, somewhere no one can hurt you." Grace shifted, lifting her head just enough to whisper into Shadow's ear. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he saw the dog's tail thump faintly against the seat. Shadow turned his head and nudged her with his nose, as if to say he understood. The road narrowed as it left the estate and wound into the forest. Towering pines lined the path, their branches bending under the weight of snow. The storm thickened, each flake whipping sideways in the wind, reducing visibility to a tunnel of pale light ahead. Daniel's focus sharpened, instincts honed from years in hostile terrain returning as naturally as breath. This was different terrain, but the same principle. Keep moving, keep watch, trust nothing. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror. Evelyn's estate lights had disappeared behind a curtain of snow. For the first time that night, the girls seemed to exhale, just a fraction, their shoulders slumping as the tension eased. But Daniel knew better than to trust relief. Evelyn wasn't the type to let go. Her threat lingered, a promise that echoed louder than the storm outside. The SUV climbed higher into the hills, the forest closing in tighter, the headlights catching only flashes of bark and snow. Daniel's mind wandered briefly to the cabin ahead. The cedar siding weathered by years, the old stove waiting to be lit, the quilts his mother had made folded in the loft. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was his. It was far enough from Evelyn's reach, at least for tonight. He imagined the girls there, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Shadow curled at their feet. He clung to that vision, because without it, the weight of what they had endured would crush him. The silence in the car stretched long. Then Lily whispered again, almost to herself, "I made a wish." Daniel glanced at her through the mirror. "On the candle?" Her small nod was almost invisible. "I wished you'd come." The words pierced him, sharp and deep, more than any bullet ever had. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening, but he kept his voice steady. "Then it looks like wishes do come true." Shadow shifted, laying his head across Lily's lap. For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. The snow fell heavier, the wind howling through the pines. But inside the SUV, in that fragile silence, something began to mend. Daniel pressed his foot gently on the gas, steering deeper into the storm, toward the cabin, toward the unknown battles waiting. He knew tonight was only the beginning. Evelyn's calm stare from the porch was a promise of war. But as he glanced again at the girls, Lily's small hand resting on Shadow's head, Grace leaning against his shoulder, he felt resolve harden like steel in his chest. Whatever came, he would not let them down again. The storm swallowed the road behind them. Ahead, the dark forest stretched endless, waiting to test them. But for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't afraid of the fight. The tires crunched across the last bend of the forest road before the cabin came into view. It sat tucked beneath a thick canopy of pines, their branches sagging with snow, a lone figure of cedar and stone against the wilderness. The siding was weathered to a soft gray, shutters faded green, the chimney standing tall but silent. Daniel hadn't been here in years, not since before deployment. Not since before grief had hollowed him out. Now, in the quiet storm, it felt less like a house and more like a question. Could this place still hold warmth? Could it still hold them? The SUV rolled to a stop. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound beneath the hush of falling snow. Inside, the twins remained still, strapped in their seats, as though movement itself might summon danger back. Daniel turned, his breath fogging faintly in the cold interior. "We're here," he said gently. His voice carried an unfamiliar softness, the kind reserved for wounds too deep to touch. Neither Lily nor Grace moved. Their eyes stayed fixed on the frosted windows, as if the forest beyond might swallow them whole. It was Shadow who moved first. With practiced ease, he nudged his way between the seats and pawed lightly at the door. Daniel opened it, and the shepherd leapt into the snow with a thud, shaking himself off before trotting to the cabin porch. He looked back once, ears pricked, urging. Daniel opened the back door, crouching so his face was level with theirs. "Come on," he murmured. "It's cold out here. Let's get you warm." Grace unbuckled slowly, sliding across the seat with hesitance. But her hand reached immediately for Shadow, who had bounded back to meet her. She buried her fingers in his fur, clinging as though he were the only safe bridge between the SUV and the unknown. Lily followed, clutching Daniel's sleeve for balance. The three of them made their way across the snow-dusted porch. The wood groaned under their steps, familiar to Daniel, foreign to the girls. He fished the old brass key from his pocket, its metal worn smooth from years of disuse, and slid it into the lock. The door resisted at first, swollen from the cold, before giving way with a sharp creak. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of dust, cold stone, and something faintly sweet, pine needles left in forgotten corners. The girls froze in the doorway, bodies rigid. Their eyes darted across the dim interior, the shadowed furniture draped with sheets, the silence too thick to trust. Daniel stepped inside and crossed to the stove. He knelt, gathering kindling from the old bin and striking a match. Flames flickered, then caught, slowly spreading warmth into the chill. The orange glow softened the room, painting the cedar walls with life. "See?" Daniel said quietly, half to himself. "Not so bad." The girls didn't move. They lingered at the threshold, their coats still buttoned, their boots leaving small puddles where the snow melted. Shadow padded back to them, nudging Lily gently with his nose, then Grace. He trotted a few steps into the room and looked back expectantly. Only then, as if he had given permission, did they step inside. Daniel watched as Shadow circled once, before lying down near the stove. Grace lowered herself beside him almost immediately, pulling a crumpled sketchbook from her small bag. She opened to a blank page, gripping a pencil with fingers too tight, and began to draw. Lines scratched quickly, shapes forming without pause. She didn't look up. Lily stayed closer to the door, her eyes still darting. Daniel walked slowly to the kitchen area, pulling out a loaf of bread and a tin of soup from the small pantry. It wasn't much, but it was warm food. He prepared bowls, setting them carefully on the table. "Dinner's ready," he said, his tone careful. Grace kept drawing. Lily hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Shadow, then to the food. She didn't move until the shepherd rose, padded over, and settled by her side. Only then did she shuffle toward the table, sliding onto the chair nearest the dog. She picked at the bread first, then dipped it into the soup, small bites taken only when Shadow's body pressed against hers. Daniel sat across from her, every motion deliberate, unhurried. He ate slowly, quietly, as if mirroring their silence might be its own form of comfort. He stole glances at Grace, who remained on the floor, sketching feverishly in the firelight. Her page filled with heavy lines. A cabin surrounded by towering trees, two small figures standing alone in the snow. No faces, just outlines. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't interrupt. He simply let her draw, knowing the images spoke where words could not. The fire crackled louder as the room grew warmer. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering across faded photographs still hanging from nails. Memories of a life before war, before loss. Daniel felt their weight pressing in, but he pushed it aside. Tonight wasn't about him. When Lily finally pushed her bowl away, half finished, she leaned against Shadow, eyelids heavy. Grace added one last line to her drawing, then placed the sketchbook beside the dog's paw, as though entrusting him with her secrets. Shadow licked her hand once before resting his head over the book. Daniel stood slowly, gathering the bowls. He glanced at the girls, his throat tight, 1,000 words caught between silence and fear. But he said only, "You're safe here. I promise." The promise hung in the air, fragile but real. Whether they believed it yet, he couldn't tell. But as the firelight warmed their faces, as Shadow kept watch beside them, something shifted. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the first step across the bridge from fear to something more. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the forest in white. The storm deepened, the night stretched long. But inside the cabin, beneath the cedar roof and the crackle of fire, 3 lives and 1 loyal shepherd began the slow, uncertain work of finding their way back to each other. The fire in the stove burned low, its glow dimming into a bed of red embers. The cabin had grown quiet except for the occasional snap of wood and the soft sighs of wind pressing against the window panes. Upstairs in the loft, 2 narrow beds stood side by side, their quilts patched and faded from years past. Daniel had spread them carefully, smoothing the corners the way his mother once had, hoping the familiar order might feel like safety. The twins stood by the edge of the room, hesitant. Lily's hand clung to Grace's sleeve, her eyes flicking to the dark corners, as though shadows might reach out and drag her away. Grace, though braver in posture, pressed close to her sister, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. Daniel crouched, his voice low and steady. "These were mine, when I was a boy. Same quilts, same beds, nothing scary here. Just a roof to keep the snow out." They didn't answer. Instead, their eyes tracked Shadow as he limped up the wooden stairs, his claws clicking softly against the planks. He padded to the space between the beds, turned in a slow circle, then lowered himself onto the rug, his body forming a silent barricade. He faced the door, ears pricked, chest rising and falling in measured rhythm. Only then, after Shadow settled, did Lily move. She released her sister's sleeve and crawled beneath the quilt, small hands pulling it up to her chin. Grace followed, laying her sketchbook gently on the nightstand before sliding into her own bed. Their eyes stayed on the shepherd until their breathing steadied. their rigid bodies softening inch by inch. Daniel lingered at the door, one hand braced against the frame. He didn't step fully inside. Something about the moment felt fragile, like a delicate web that could shatter with too much noise. So he simply stood, watching. The sight pierced him. He had seen men sleep in foxholes, on concrete, in deserts where mortars fell like rain. He had seen them cling to their rifles, the way his daughters now clung to Shadow's presence. He understood it. The war might be over for him, but for them, it had only shifted battlegrounds. Lily stirred once, whispering in her sleep, the words too faint to catch. Grace rolled onto her side, arm draped toward the rug, her fingers brushing the shepherd's fur. Shadow did not move, but his tail tapped once against the floor, a quiet reassurance. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to go to them, to sit at the edge of their beds, to tell them they were safe. But he knew safety wasn't something words alone could build. It had to be shown, brick by brick, night after night. He stepped back, easing the door mostly shut, leaving a crack for the faint glow of the stove to filter through. Downstairs, the cabin felt cavernous, filled with ghosts of memory. He sat heavily at the table, elbows on the wood, staring at the fire as though it might give him answers. Fatherhood, he thought, was a different kind of battlefield. Out there, he'd faced enemies he could see, threats he could measure. Here, the enemy was silence, the kind that grew in the corners of children's minds when fear and neglect had starved them. No amount of training had prepared him for that. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Daniel closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. He remembered the last phone call, Lily's thin voice whispering, "I miss you, Daddy." He remembered the way it had been cut off, replaced by Evelyn's sickly sweet tone, insisting the girls were fine. And he remembered believing it, because it was easier than facing the possibility that they weren't. Shame coiled in his gut. He should have seen it sooner. Should have come sooner. A soft creak on the stairs drew his attention. He turned, half rising, but it was only Shadow. The shepherd padded down slowly, his gait uneven from the old wound, but his eyes alert. He approached Daniel, sat at his side, and leaned his weight against his leg. Daniel rested a hand on the dog's head, fingers weaving into the thick fur. "You always know, don't you?" he murmured. "Out there, you found the wires I couldn't see. Saved my life more times than I can count. And now you're saving theirs." Shadow blinked, steady and solemn, as if agreeing. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. He poured a glass of water from the old jug on the counter and sipped, the chill biting his teeth. Upstairs, the floor creaked lightly, the small, restless movements of children unaccustomed to peace. He imagined their dreams, perhaps a candle sputtering in the dark, perhaps Evelyn's voice cutting like a knife. He prayed that Shadow's warmth beside them would chase the nightmares away. The night dragged on, hours marked only by the shifting glow of embers, the sigh of wind, the tick of the old clock on the wall. Daniel dozed once, head in his hands, but the faint sound of a whimper upstairs pulled him back awake. He didn't go to them. He trusted Shadow, trusted the shepherd's low, steady presence to be enough. And maybe it was, because the whimper faded, replaced by silence once more. When dawn finally crept into the forest, pale light spilling through the frosted windows, Daniel rose stiffly from the chair. His body ached with the familiar weight of sleepless nights, but his mind was clear. He climbed the stairs slowly, peering into the loft. The girls still slept, curled beneath the quilts. Shadow was exactly where he had been hours before, head resting on his paws, eyes half open, the eternal sentinel. Grace's hand still dangled over the edge of the bed, fingers brushing his fur. Daniel stood there quietly, the image searing itself into him. This was what mattered. Not medals, not missions. This. He closed the door gently and descended the stairs, his resolve settling into place. Fatherhood was a war of patience, of gentleness, of showing up day after day, and he would not fail this time. The cabin groaned in the morning cold. Outside, the storm had slowed, snow clinging to every branch, every fence post, as if the whole forest were holding its breath. Inside, the silence remained heavy, but no longer hopeless. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the faint stirrings of something he hadn't dared believe in, the possibility of healing. Morning came slow to Cedar Hollow. The storm had broken, leaving the forest hushed beneath a heavy quilt of white. Frost clung to the cabin windows, and sunlight filtered weakly through, scattering in fractured beams across the wooden floor. Inside, the warmth of the stove pulsed gently, the only barrier against the brittle cold outside. Daniel stood at the counter, pouring black coffee into a chipped mug, when Shadow lifted his head from the rug. His ears twitched, eyes narrowing toward the door. The shepherd let out a low rumble, not a warning, but an alert. Someone was coming. Moments later, there was a knock. 3 soft raps, careful, unhurried. Daniel set his mug down, his muscles instinctively tightening, years of combat training still wired into him. He moved to the door, peering through the frosted glass before opening it. A woman stood on the porch, bundled in a forest green coat dusted with road salt, a knit beanie pulled low over auburn hair, braided neatly down her back. Snowflakes clung to the wool scarf wrapped around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes, warm hazel, steady and kind, met his with recognition. "Emma Brooks," she said softly, offering a tentative smile. "I heard you were back." Daniel blinked, then exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Emma." He pushed the door open wider. "News travels fast." "In this town it always does," she replied, stepping inside as he gestured. The warmth met her with a sigh of relief. She stamped the snow from her boots before unwrapping her scarf. "The sheriff's cousin plays bingo with my neighbor. Word got around." Daniel allowed himself a brief, weary smile. "That sounds about right." Shadow padded forward, sniffing the air, then relaxed, recognizing her calm presence. Emma crouched slightly, holding out a hand for the shepherd to inspect. "And this must be Shadow," she said. Her voice carried the cadence of a teacher's, gentle, measured, never demanding. "You've got a loyal one here." "He saved my life more than once," Daniel said quietly. Emma straightened, her gaze shifting toward the loft stairs. She lowered her voice. "Are they here?" Daniel nodded. Upstairs. As if summoned, Lily appeared at the top of the steps, her braids uneven from sleep, her eyes wide and wary. She clutched the railing with white knuckles. Grace followed slowly, sketchbook tucked under her arm, her gaze flitting between Daniel and the unfamiliar woman. Emma's heart tightened at the sight. The guarded posture, the hesitation in every movement. She had seen it before in children who carried burdens far too heavy for their age. She knew better than to approach too quickly. "Hi there," Emma said, keeping her tone light. She crouched slightly, so her eyes were level with theirs. "I'm Miss Brooks. I teach second grade at Cedar Hollow Elementary. That's where you'll be going after winter break." Lily didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward the door, as if planning escape routes. Grace pressed closer to her sister, gripping the sketchbook tighter. Emma didn't move closer. She simply smiled and reached into her bag. "I brought something for you both, just in case." She pulled out a small coloring book, its cover bright with cartoon animals, and a box of thick crayons designed for small hands. She set them gently on the rug near Shadow, not offering them directly, but leaving them as an invitation. "You don't have to use them right now," Emma said softly. "I just thought they might make things a little brighter." Shadow nosed the crayons once, then settled back down, as if endorsing the gift. Grace's eyes flicked toward the items, then to her father. Daniel gave a small nod, his face calm, encouraging. Tentatively, Grace crouched and reached for the coloring book. She opened it slowly, flipping past the pages until she landed on a simple outline of a house. Her pencil traced the edges before she reached for a crayon. The color she chose was black. Emma's chest ached, but she kept her expression neutral. She glanced at Daniel, who stood silently behind them, jaw tight. Lily remained by the railing, unmoving. Her eyes flicked toward Emma, then dropped to Shadow, who was sprawled across the floor like a silent guardian. Only when the shepherd thumped his tail once did Lily descend the steps, one slow tread at a time. She didn't approach the crayons, but she slid onto the rug beside Grace, her body pressed close. Emma resisted the urge to rush in, to comfort, to tell them everything would be all right. She knew trust was a fragile thread, and forcing it only made it snap. Instead, she lowered herself onto the couch, keeping distance, but presence. "They don't say much," Daniel said quietly, almost apologetic. "They don't need to," Emma replied, her gaze still on the girls. "Children show you what they've been through, just not always in words." Silence settled over the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the soft scratch of crayon against paper. Grace's hand moved steadily, filling the outline of the house with dark strokes. Lily watched, her fingers tangled in Shadow's fur. Emma leaned back slightly, her voice gentle. "I'm glad they have you now," she said to Daniel. "And him," she added, nodding toward the shepherd. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at his daughters. "I just hope it's not too late." Emma shook her head. "It's never too late. Not if you stay." The girls didn't look up, but Lily's hand, almost unconsciously, rested on Shadow's head. Grace's lines softened, the black turning to gray as she reached for a lighter crayon. Small signs, fragile, but real. Emma folded her hands in her lap, patient. She knew the road ahead would be long. But in this quiet room, with a loyal dog lying guard and a father trying to learn a new kind of strength, she saw the faintest glimmer of something worth fighting for. The beginning of trust. By late afternoon, the cabin was wrapped in shadows. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the pines draped in white like watchful sentinels. Inside, warmth pulsed from the stove, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and melted wax from the lanterns Daniel had lit. He stood in the small kitchen space, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the modest supplies he had unearthed from the pantry. A bag of flour, sugar, butter chilled solid in the icebox, and an old tin of cinnamon his mother had once used during holidays. Not much, but enough. Emma, who had stayed after her first visit, caught his eye. "Cookies," she said simply, with the kind of certainty teachers used when coaxing children towards something new. Messy, sweet, and safe. Sometimes that's all it takes. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He turned to the girls, who sat together on the rug near Shadow. Grace was still bent over her sketchbook, her crayons scattered like tiny fragments of thought. Lily leaned against the dog, her cheek resting against his side, eyes heavy with watchfulness. Neither looked toward the kitchen. "Girls," Daniel said softly, "have you ever made cookies before?" Grace didn't respond, her pencil still scratching. Lily shook her head without lifting it. Emma moved forward, her voice light. "Then tonight will be your first time. But here's the secret." She leaned closer, her smile conspiratorial. "They only taste good if you laugh while you make them." That earned her a glance. Quick, uncertain, but curious. Daniel began pulling ingredients from the shelves, setting them on the counter, one by one. The flour dusted into the air as he poured it into a bowl, catching the lantern light like snowflakes caught mid-fall. He cracked eggs, the sound sharp and sudden in the stillness. Grace's pencil stopped moving. "Want to help?" Daniel asked, holding out a spoon. There was no rush, no pressure, just an offer left open. Grace's eyes flicked to Emma, then to her father. Slowly, she set the sketchbook aside and rose. Her small steps carried her toward the counter, cautious but deliberate. Lily stayed behind, her fingers curled in Shadow's fur. Daniel handed Grace the spoon, his large hand brushing hers with care. "Stir this for me, gently." Grace dipped the spoon into the thick mixture and began to turn it. Her movements were clumsy at first, stiff, but Daniel didn't correct her. He simply watched, his voice soft. "That's it. You've got it." Emma joined in, sprinkling sugar into the bowl, her laughter soft and genuine when a little spilled onto the counter. Grace's lips pressed together, but the corners twitched ever so slightly. "Here," Daniel said, sliding the butter closer. "We need this too. It's stubborn. You think you can help me tame it?" Grace looked up at him, the tiniest flicker of challenge in her eyes. Together, they pressed the butter into the mix, her small hand on the spoon, his steadying hers. Flour puffed up, landing in streaks across her sweater. She froze, eyes wide. Emma laughed gently. "That means you're doing it right." Grace blinked, then, almost imperceptibly, let out a small puff of breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't silent either. She stirred harder, the spoon clattering against the bowl. Daniel felt his chest ache with something he hadn't dared hope for. A crack in the wall of fear. When the dough was ready, they rolled it into small, uneven balls and placed them on the battered baking sheet. Grace's hands were dusted white with flour, her cheeks flushed with concentration. Daniel slid the tray into the oven, the smell of cinnamon and sugar already drifting into the room. It was then, as Emma dusted her own hands and exaggerated a sneeze from the flour cloud, that it happened. Grace giggled. The sound was short, sharp, and quickly muffled by her hand, but it was real. Daniel froze, every muscle tightening, as though he'd heard something fragile, something holy. His eyes met Emma's across the counter, both of them holding still, afraid to break the moment. Grace's giggle lingered, softening into a shy smile. Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor, as if in agreement. Lily, still by the fire, lifted her head at the sound. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, flicked to her sister, then to Daniel. Slowly, she shifted closer to Shadow, curling into his side. Her lips moved against his ear in a whisper too soft for anyone else to hear. The shepherd leaned into her, silent, steady, his breath warming her hands. Daniel's heart clenched. He didn't need to know the words. Whatever Lily had whispered, it was trust in its earliest form, spoken not to him, but to the one she believed could carry it. Shadow had always been more than a dog. He was a bridge. The oven timer ticked softly, and soon the first batch of cookies emerged, imperfectly shaped, some lopsided, some too flat, but golden, warm, and fragrant. Daniel set the tray on the counter, the smell filling every corner of the cabin. "Magic cookies," Emma said, her smile wide. "Remember the rule? They taste better if you laugh while you make them." Grace reached for one cautiously, blowing on it before taking a bite. Her eyes widened at the sweetness. She glanced at Lily, who still leaned against Shadow. Without a word, she broke the cookie in half and carried it to her sister. Lily hesitated, then took it. For the first time that day, she ate without waiting for permission, her head resting against Shadow as she chewed. Her eyes softened, the faintest trace of ease flickering across her face. Daniel stood back, watching, his throat tight. He had led men through sieges, through deserts and mountains, and had stared death in the face without flinching. But this, the sight of his daughter whispering to a dog, the sound of a shy giggle breaking silence, this unraveled him. He caught Emma's gaze again. She nodded slightly, her eyes shining. Small cracks had appeared in the silence, fragile, precious. And for the first time since stepping into that storage shed, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. Night came heavy and absolute. The storm had passed, but the forest around the cabin seemed to breathe in long, hollow sighs, the branches creaking under their weight of ice. Inside, the warmth of the stove kept the air gentle, though silence clung to the walls, as if even sound feared to disturb the fragile peace that had begun to form. The twins were asleep in the small loft room Daniel had cleared for them, and their breaths rose and fell unevenly, still marked by the remnants of fear, though exhaustion had finally pulled them into a shallow rest. Grace curled with her sketchbook under her pillow, while Lily's arm clutched a teddy bear so tight its fur was pressed flat beneath her fingers. Shadow lay at the foot of their beds, his massive body coiled like a sentinel. His ears twitched at every creak of the timbers, every flick of snow sliding from the roof. His golden eyes caught the dim glow of the lantern that Daniel had left burning low, casting shadows that trembled across the log walls. Daniel lingered in the doorway, his shoulder pressed against the frame. He had promised himself he'd let them rest, that he wouldn't hover, but fatherhood, he was learning, was not a battlefield you ever retreated from. You stayed, even if all you could do was listen. For a moment he let himself breathe. Grace's earlier giggle still echoed faintly in his mind. Lily's whisper into Shadow's ear. A tiny sparks of healing, fragile as glass. He closed his eyes, clutching that memory as a lifeline. Then a sound cut through the stillness. Not loud, just a low rumble. Daniel's eyes snapped open. Shadow was no longer still. His body had stiffened, muscles tight, lips lifting just enough to reveal the edge of his teeth. His gaze was locked not at the door, not at the window, but at the object nestled beneath Lily's arm. The teddy bear. The growl deepened, so quiet it was almost a vibration in the floorboards. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Shadow," he whispered. The dog didn't move his gaze. Daniel stepped inside, careful not to wake the girls. He crouched, studying the bear. It was an ordinary thing at first glance. soft, brown, one-button eye missing, its seams fraying from years of handling. But in Shadow's eyes it was something else entirely. He reached out slowly, and Shadow shifted, ears pinned, teeth bared a fraction more. Not at Daniel, but at the bear. Daniel hesitated. In war, he had learned to trust the instincts of his unit dogs. They saw what men could not. They remembered what men refused to. And this look, the unblinking, wary fixation, was one he had seen before, outside villages where explosives were hidden in children's toys. His throat tightened. "Easy," he murmured. But the unease in his chest coiled tighter. Very gently, he brushed a finger along the bear's fabric. It was cold, unnaturally so, as if it had been left outside. His hand hovered over the seam at its side. He could feel something faint beneath the stuffing. A line, too stiff, too deliberate. Shadow's growl vibrated deeper. Lily stirred, tightening her hold on the bear, pulling it closer to her chest. Daniel froze. Every instinct screamed at him not to rip it away. Trauma lived in objects. He had seen soldiers cling to tokens of survival. A scarf, a dented lighter, a photograph charred at the edges. To tear it away could mean tearing open the wound itself. But what if the wound was already inside? He glanced at Shadow, whose body remained coiled like a spring. The shepherd's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to the bear, as if urging him to understand. Daniel rose slowly, backing away. He stood in the doorway again, the unease gnawing at him. He could not tear it from Lily's arms tonight. Not yet. But something was wrong. Something lived in that toy. He stayed awake long after the girls had slipped into deeper sleep. The wind scraped against the shutters, the fire cracked low, and still Shadow kept his vigil, his gaze never leaving the bear. And Daniel understood something in that silence, that healing would not come without confronting the shadows hidden in the smallest of things, that some of the battles waiting ahead would not be fought with rifles or fists, but with memories sewn into fabric, tucked into the arms of a child. For the first time since leaving the city, Daniel felt the cabin's walls closing in. He listened to the growl that never quite ceased, and he knew this was not over, not by a long shot. The watcher in the dark wasn't outside. It was already here. The morning light crept through frost-caked windows as Daniel sat in the loft, staring at the ragged teddy bear Shadow had growled at all night. Its matted fur seemed harmless, yet his soldier's instincts said otherwise. Shadow stood tense, eyes locked on the toy, and barked. The same bark Daniel remembered from patrols overseas, just before they uncovered hidden traps. With a pocket knife, Daniel slit the seam. Stuffing spilled out, and then his blade scraped something solid. He froze, then pulled free a black device with a blinking diode. A recorder and transmitter. Someone had planted surveillance in Lily's arms. His blood ran cold. Every laugh, every whisper in the cabin had been stolen. Anger surged, but training held him back. You don't smash intelligence, you trace it. Shadow pressed close, waiting for orders. Daniel pocketed the device, realizing their refuge was no sanctuary. Downstairs, Grace's laughter with the twins only hardened his resolve. They could never know. Not yet. That night, when silence fell, Daniel finally pressed play. Static hissed, then a voice. Evelyn's. Smooth. Venomous. If you tell him, I'll take your sister away. Children who can't keep secrets. disappear. The threat was calm, cruel, undeniable. Daniel's chest tightened as he thought of his late sister Clara, and for the first time he understood. Her silence had been fear, not madness. Evelyn hadn't just haunted their past. She was here, in the walls of their lives, poisoning even the toys in their hands. "Remember," Evelyn's voice whispered, "I am always listening. Even here. Especially here." The recording clicked into silence. The diode blinked one last time, then faded. Daniel sat frozen. A hollow ringing filled his ears. He had spent years on battlefields, seen men fall, heard the last words of friends. But nothing had struck him like hearing that threat in his own kitchen, aimed not at soldiers, but at children. His eyes burned as he lowered his head into his hands. The weight of it was unbearable. The proof that Clara's haunted eyes, her restless pacing, her desperate attempts to protect her daughters, every bit of it had been justified. She hadn't been broken. She had been fighting a war no one else could see. Shadow rose, pressing his muzzle against Daniel's arm. The dog's steady warmth anchored him to the present, pulling him back from the edge of despair. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "She knew. God, Clara knew." He remembered the last time he'd seen his sister alive, her hand clutching his sleeve, words half-formed, never spoken. He had thought it was exhaustion, trauma. But it was scary. Fear that if she told him, Evelyn would make good on her promise. Daniel's gaze hardened, the grief in his chest forging into something sharper. He had been slow to understand, but now there was no room for doubt. Evelyn had not only manipulated, she was terrorized. She had carved obedience into the twins with threats no child should ever hear. And now, with Clara gone, it was on him to stand between Evelyn and the girls. His jaw locked as he shut off the recorder and set it on the table. He felt Shadow's weight lean into him, steady as stone. Daniel placed a hand on the shepherd's neck, his voice low, steady, burning. "She's not taking them. Not while I'm breathing." For the first time since bringing the twins here, Daniel felt the battlefield shift. This was no longer about shelter or healing. This was war, waged in whispers and shadows. And Evelyn had drawn first blood. He stared at the recorder one last time before sliding it into a drawer and covering it with a dish rag. The proof was there now, undeniable. Clara's ghost wasn't haunting him. She was demanding justice. Daniel rose, the floor creaking beneath his weight. Upstairs, the twins breathed softly in sleep, unaware of the venom their mother had left behind. He would keep it that way. He would let them laugh, whisper to Shadow, bake cookies, sketch quietly by the fire. He would let them be children again, and he would carry the weight of Evelyn's voice alone until the day came when silence would no longer protect them, but truth would. The morning light seeped weakly through the blinds, carrying the smell of wood smoke and last night's storm. The twins were still upstairs, their muffled footsteps soft as they played in the loft. Shadow lay in the doorway, stretched out but alert, amber eyes tracking every shift of Daniel's weight. On the table between Daniel's hands sat his phone. He had been staring at it for nearly 10 minutes, thumb hovering over Emma Brooks's number. The teacher had already proven she cared for the girls in ways that went beyond duty, bringing them books, kneeling to their height, speaking to them as if they were more than children shaped by fear. If there was anyone he trusted to help carry this weight, it was her. Still, dialing the number felt like stepping off a cliff. It meant opening the door, admitting that what lived inside the recorder was real, and that he could not fight Evelyn alone. Finally, he pressed the button. The dial tone thrummed against his ear, each ring a reminder that time was bleeding out. Then a soft click, and Emma's voice filled the line. Warm, steady, the kind of voice that had coaxed countless children into feeling safe. "Daniel?" He swallowed. "Emma, I need your help." A pause. She must have heard the edge in his tone, because her reply carried no hesitation. "Tell me what happened." He explained in clipped sentences, his soldiers' training surfacing. The teddy bear, the device, the playback. Evelyn's voice threatens children in the quiet of their room. His sister, Clara's silence, now explained. When he finished, the line was silent but alive, as though Emma was gathering herself. "Daniel," she said at last, her words trembling but firm. "You're not imagining things. I've seen signs in the girls before, flinches that didn't fit, eyes that darted at shadows, but I couldn't prove anything. Not until now." Daniel gripped the edge of the table. "And proof is what we need." "Yes," Emma said. "And you can't carry this by yourself anymore. There's someone I want you to talk to. Marlene Reyes. She's an attorney who has taken cases like this before, custody battles where abusers manipulate the system, intimidate families. She doesn't back down. If anyone can help protect the girls legally, it's her." The name was unfamiliar, but something in Emma's tone lent it weight. "Do you trust her?" "With my life," Emma said without pause. "She doesn't scare easily." Daniel's chest loosened slightly. "Set it up." Within the hour, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered, and a new voice entered his world, measured, resolute, carrying the cadence of someone used to speaking in courts and cutting through lies. "Mr. Callahan, this is Marlene Reyes. Emma briefed me. I'm so sorry for what your family has endured, but I want you to know, you're not alone in this." Daniel found himself nodding, even though she couldn't see it. "The recording, it's proof, but proof only matters if the right hands hold it." "Exactly," Marlene replied. "Keep it secure. Make no copies yet. The fewer who know it exists, the better. I'll guide you on how to present it so it can't be dismissed as tampered evidence." Her voice sharpened slightly. "And Daniel, you need to understand something. Women like Evelyn don't just stop. They escalate when they realize they're losing control. Protecting those girls means we move carefully, but it also means we move soon." Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at the staircase where faint giggles carried down from above. The sound twisted his chest, so fragile, so rare, and yet now under threat. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "For now, documentation," Marlene said. "Any journals Clara kept, any letters, witnesses who saw the girls with Evelyn. Emma and I will start building a file. The stronger the case, the harder it will be for Evelyn to claw her way back into their lives." Daniel's hand rested unconsciously on Shadow's neck. The shepherd hadn't moved during the entire call, as if he understood the gravity of every word. His steady presence grounded Daniel. "I'll get you what you need," Daniel said. "And I'll be ready," Marlene replied. "I promise you, Mr. Callahan, I've gone up against people like her before. They hide behind charm and reputation, but once the truth is dragged into the light, they crumble. For now, protect those girls. Let me handle the rest." When the call ended, Daniel sat in the quiet kitchen for a long moment. The recorder was still hidden in the drawer, its secret venom sealed away. But now, it wasn't just his burden. He had allies. Emma with her compassion, Marlene with her steel, and Shadow, watching with eyes that never wavered. Daniel exhaled, a rough sound that was half relief, half resolve. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man standing alone at the edge of a battlefield. He was part of a formation, however small, and formations held. Shadow shifted closer, laying his head on Daniel's boot. The silent gesture was enough to steady him. Daniel whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "We're not alone anymore." The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the cabin wrapped in a damp hush. The stove ticked as it cooled. The air scented faintly of ash and wet earth. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered, her small hand dragging color across paper. Beside her, Lily leaned against Shadow, head resting on the shepherd's side as his steady breathing rose and fell like a lullaby. At first glance, it was ordinary play. But when Daniel leaned closer, his chest tightened. Grace wasn't drawing flowers or houses. Her page filled with cages, black bars shutting in stick figures, mouths slashed with heavy red X's. Shadow shifted, ears flicking forward, sensing what Daniel had not yet said aloud. Emma Brooks, who had come again to check on the girls, crouched beside Grace. "Can you tell me about your drawing, sweetheart?" Grace didn't look up. "It's a quiet place," she whispered. Daniel's breath caught. Emma's eyes widened, then softened. "And who makes it quiet?" Grace hesitated. She picked up a brown crayon and sketched a tall figure. Across the dress she scrawled in careful, shaky letters, "Mommy." Lily buried her face deeper in Shadow's fur. The shepherd let out a low, mournful sound. Emma's voice never wavered. "You're very brave, Grace. These pictures tell a story, don't they?" Grace nodded quickly, then pressed harder with her crayon. She said if we made noise, bad things would happen. Daniel clenched his fists. He'd seen horrors in combat zones, but never in crayon lines drawn by a child. Later that day, Marlene Reyes, the attorney, arrived. Grace had filled 3 more sheets, darker each time. Looming shadows, huddled figures, a crude box shaped like a closet. Marlene spread them across the table with a steady hand. "Children don't invent trauma cues like this," she said. "These drawings, paired with the recording we already have, show a pattern of coercion. Evelyn will fight. She'll claim manipulation. But this narrative, if we protect it, a judge cannot ignore." Daniel glanced at the living room where Grace now colored a gentler picture. Shadow curled beneath a sun, Lily holding his paw. With Evelyn, fear filled the page. With Shadow, freedom. His jaw tightened. She used fear to control them. Now she'll answer for it. Marlene met his gaze. "Not with rage, with truth. We fight smart." Shadow stepped forward, placing himself between the adults and the children, silent as stone. That night, the cabin was still. Daniel drifted half asleep at the kitchen table, Shadow at his feet. Then a scream tore the silence. He was running before thought caught up, Shadow lunging ahead. Lily sat upright in bed, trembling, clinging to Shadow's fur. Grace cowered in the corner. Daniel dropped to his knees. "It's all right. You're safe here. It's me, Daniel." But Lily's mouth gave only gasps. Her fingernails dug into Shadow's coat as if letting go meant falling. The shepherd pressed against her, grounding her with his weight. Daniel stroked her hair. No one can hurt you here. Not while I'm here. Not while Shadow's here. Finally, words cracked from Lily's lips. Don't. Let her take us. Daniel's breath shuddered. Grace's eyes widened. Her sister hadn't spoken in weeks. No one's taking you anywhere, Daniel said, each word firm. Not now, not ever. Lily's tears spilled. Shadow rested his head across her lap, anchoring her. Daniel wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, careful not to break her grip on the dog. Grace whispered, "She dreamed about Mommy again." Daniel's jaw clenched. Dreams couldn't hurt, but they cut deep. He forced calm into his voice. "Your mother can't reach you here. Not while I'm breathing. Not while Shadow's watching." Shadow gave a low rumble, tail thumping once. Lily's grip loosened slightly, her forehead brushing Daniel's chest, a fleeting but fragile trust. "You spoke, Lily," he whispered. "That's how we keep you safe, by listening." Grace slid closer, her hand resting on Lily's arm. Shadow shifted to press against them both. Slowly, breathing steadied. Within minutes, the girls slept under Daniel's watch, while Shadow kept vigil at the foot of the bed. The next afternoon, Daniel parked behind an unmarked office on the edge of town. Marlene had arranged it. Dr. Helen Brandt, a trauma psychologist. Inside, the waiting area felt nothing like a clinic. Toys lined shelves, a table with crayons stood ready, stuffed animals filled a basket. Safety whispered from every corner. Grace clung to Daniel's hand. Lily's fingers twisted into Shadow's fur, the dog walking beside her like a soldier entering a different kind of battlefield. Dr. Brandt greeted them gently. "Hello, Grace. Hello, Lily. You must be Shadow." She looked at Daniel. "You can wait next door. Shadow should stay with them. Dogs are bridges." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. If Shadow stayed, he could. Inside the playroom, Dr. Brandt settled on the rug with paper and crayons. She drew a simple house, a tree, a stick figure girl with a balloon. "Sometimes it's hard to talk. Sometimes it's easier to draw. Want to help me?" Grace picked up a black crayon and drew tall bars beside the house. She shoved the paper forward, face tight. Dr. Brandt added another figure, a dog beside the girl. "Do you want to give him a name?" For a moment, Lily only clutched Shadow, then, barely audible, "Shadow." The shepherd lifted his head, brushed her hand with his tongue, then settled again. "That's a strong name," Dr. Brandt said. "Dogs with names like that don't scare easily." Grace drew again, a small figure behind the bars, the crayon pressed so hard it broke. She shoved it away. "You showed it very bravely," Dr. Brandt said quietly. Lily buried her face in Shadow's neck. Her cracked whisper slipped out. "She said if we told, she'd take us away." Grace froze. The words hung like glass in the air. "That must have been frightening," Dr. Brandt said softly. Shadow pressed closer into Lily's lap, anchoring her tremor. His gaze lifted briefly, as if urging patience. The session moved in fragments. Grace stacked blocks, then knocked them down, muttering, "They break. They always break." Lily traced circles in Shadow's fur, whispering words, dark, locked, quiet. Through it all, Shadow never moved. He absorbed their fear, holding the edges so they could set it down. By the time Daniel returned, the girls were curled against Shadow, half asleep. Grace had pulled a blanket over Lily, who clutched a stuffed bear. Dr. Brandt met Daniel at the door. They've begun to speak. Not everything, but enough. Their fear has shape. Daniel's throat ached. How bad is it? Bad enough that silence became survival, she said. But with shadow and time, we may draw it out, step by step. Daniel brushed his hand over Shadow's head. The shepherd's eyes were steady, commanding. Stay the course. They're not alone anymore. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a flicker beyond fear. Something like hope. Evelyn sat alone at her oak desk, her study immaculate. Books, certificates, curated photos, all projecting warmth she never gave. To the untrained eye, it was the workspace of a respectable professional. That was the mask. Her pen glided across the page. Grace exhibits delusions, drawings of cages, monsters, violent imagery. Lily shows disassociation, suggestive of hereditary deficiencies. Elegant lies wrapped in clinical detachment. She flipped through highlighted report cards, attendance slips. Even a fire drill meltdown spun into evidence of instability. She rehearsed her performance. Muted clothes, pearls, hands folded. Calm voice against trembling children. The game was simple. Appear sane while painting others as broken. She whispered to the empty room. They can cry. They can draw their monsters. But I'll be the one the court believes. At the cabin, dusk painted the woods in copper light. Grace sketched at the table. Lily finished soup. Shadow dozed, but alert. Then, 3 raps on the door. Sharp, deliberate. Shadow rose instantly, fur bristling, growl reverberating through the floor. Daniel's chest tightened. Through the window, Evelyn, perfect posture, calm authority, eyes cold. Mr. Hale, she called smoothly, I've come for a visitation with my daughters. Her daughters, the words cut like a blade. Behind him, Grace whispered, Don't let her in. Lily trembled, clinging to his sleeve. Shadow snarled, placing himself at the door. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the shepherd. For an instant, her mask slipped. Control your animal, she snapped. This aggression is unacceptable. Daniel cracked the door an inch. You should have called. This isn't how visitation works. Visitation is not yours to permit or deny, she countered, her tone dripping with authority. Lily's voice broke from inside. No, Grace shouted. Stay away from us. Shadow exploded with a thunderous bark that rattled the frame. Evelyn flinched before composing herself. You're making a mistake, she hissed to Daniel. The system listens to reason, and I know how to write reasons. Daniel's fists trembled, but Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him. Evelyn turned, heels sharp against the gravel. Very well, you'll hear from the court. Only after her car vanished did Shadow's growl ease. Inside, both girls clung to Daniel, Lily whispering through tears, Don't let her take us. He held them tight. This wasn't just survival now. It was a war. The storm rolled in with a low growl, thunder spreading across the mountains. Daniel felt it in his chest even before Evelyn made her move. Through legal slight, she had taken the girls temporarily. The image seared him. Lily pale as Evelyn pulled her into the car, Grace clawing at the window. Shadow had nearly broken free, his barks raw with fury. Now, only taillights smeared down the mountain road, swallowed by rain. Daniel threw himself into the truck. Shadow leapt in beside him, growling, still vibrating. "We're going after them," Daniel vowed. The first drops spattered the windshield. Evelyn drove with eerie calm, gravel crunching beneath her sedan. In the back, Lily clung to Grace. "Quiet," Evelyn snapped, before smoothing her voice. "This is for your own good." Thunder cracked overhead. Grace glared at the back of Evelyn's seat, rage burning. On the road behind, Daniel pushed the truck too fast over slickening gravel. Rain lashed the glass. Shadow braced, nose shoved into the torrent, nostrils flaring. Then, a bark, sharp and certain. He had the scent. Headlights pierced sheets of rain, catching fresh tire tracks. Evelyn's. Daniel followed. The storm thickened, lightning flashing silver across Shadow's wet fur. "Find them," Daniel muttered. Shadow barked again, tail rigid. Ahead, faint taillights flickered red. "They're there," Daniel breathed. In the sedan, Grace saw headlights closing in. Relief surged. She squeezed Lily's hand. "He's coming. Daddy's coming." Evelyn noticed too. Her calm fractured. She cursed, slamming the accelerator. The car fishtailed dangerously. The forest pressed tight, water flooding the road. Daniel's truck skidded, tires fighting the mud. Every nerve screamed disaster. He couldn't force her off, not with the girls inside. Lightning split the sky. For one breathless instant, everything was lit in stark clarity. Evelyn's car weaving ahead, the storm raging, the road dissolving under torrents. Daniel gripped the wheel, teeth clenched. "Hold on, girls," he whispered. Shadow pressed against his side, steady as stone, and together, into the storm, they drove. The storm raged without mercy, hammering the world in sheets of water so heavy it blurred the forest into a trembling haze. Inside Evelyn's SUV, the atmosphere was just as suffocating, thick with fear, the leather seats slick from the girls' damp clothes, the air stifling despite the rattling of rain on the roof. Lily sat pressed against the door, her tiny chest rising and falling too fast, eyes darting between the storm outside and her sister's pale face. Something in her small frame, usually timid, clinging, shifted. It was as if the chaos around her had carved clarity into her. This wasn't the way home. This was something else. Something is wrong. Evelyn's voice cut sharp through the storm, talking to herself more than to the children. "We'll be fine. Once we get away from him, once the system listens, finally listens, we'll start over. No more lies." Her knuckles gleamed white on the steering wheel, nails digging into the leather. Grace met Lily's gaze. In that silent exchange, years of whispered secrets and shared glances, as sisters hardened into resolve. Grace's lips trembled, but her eyes urged, "Not yet, not while she's watching." But Lily's small hands were already moving. The child's fingers fumbled at the door handle. The lock clicked faintly, lost beneath the storm's roar. Evelyn didn't notice. She was too busy craning forward, squinting through the storm as the service road twisted tighter and tighter, her mind consumed by the headlights still following behind. Lily's heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the thunder. She slipped her hand into Grace's, squeezing with all the force her little body had. "Now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Grace's breath caught. For an instant, fear nearly anchored her to the seat. But then she saw Lily's face. No longer the frightened child who clung to her every night, but a spark of desperate courage. Grace nodded. The door cracked open. Rain and wind tore into the SUV, a violent slap of nature's fury. Evelyn's head jerked to the side, eyes widening. "What are you?" she shrieked, but it was too late. Lily flung herself into the storm, dragging Grace with her. The world outside was chaotic. The girls hit the muddy ground hard, water splashing up around them, clothes instantly soaked, hair plastered to their faces. Grace cried out as her knee struck a rock, but she held on to Lily, refusing to let her go. Behind them, the SUV screeched to a halt, tires skidding dangerously on the slick road. Evelyn's door flew open, her voice slicing through the thunder. "Get back here!" Lily scrambled to her feet, tugging Grace upright. They bolted toward the tree line, their small forms vanishing into the storm-dark forest. Branches whipped at their arms, mud sucked at their shoes, but adrenaline drove them forward. Lily's lungs burned, yet her grip on Grace never loosened. For once, the younger sister led, and the older followed. Back on the road, Daniel's truck skidded to a stop as he saw the sudden commotion ahead. Through the blur of rain, he caught the sight of two small figures stumbling off the road, Evelyn's silhouette lunging after them. "Shadow!" Daniel barked. The German shepherd leapt from the cab before the engine had even quieted, hitting the ground in a spray of mud. His body became a streak of muscle and instinct, tearing across the storm toward the fleeing children. Daniel tore after him, heart hammering, every nerve screaming that seconds mattered. Evelyn crashed into the tree line, her shoes sinking deep into mud, her dress catching on branches. "Stop! You don't know what you're doing!" she shouted, voice a shrill blend of command and panic. Grace glanced back once, saw the silhouette of Evelyn gaining, and nearly stumbled from the terror that surged through her. But then there was another sound. A bark, strong, fierce, cutting through the storm like a beacon. Shadow. The dog burst through the undergrowth like a force of nature, fur plastered to his body, teeth bared in a growl that reverberated through the trees. His eyes locked on Evelyn, and in that instant, every ounce of her bravado cracked. She froze, breath heaving, as the German shepherd stood between her and the girls, his body taut, every line screaming, "You'll have to go through me first." Lily collapsed to her knees, gasping, Grace wrapping around her protectively. The storm drenched them, but neither cared. For the first time since being dragged into the car, they felt the fragile outline of safety forming again. Shadow standing guard, Daniel's voice calling their names through the storm. Grace. "Lily!" Daniel's figure crashed into the clearing seconds later, his eyes wide, scanning, until they landed on the huddled forms of his daughters. Relief hit him like a blow, almost knocking him to the ground. He rushed forward, gathering them into his arms, clinging as if letting go would mean losing them forever. The girls sobbed into his chest, the sound raw and jagged, but alive. So achingly alive. Shadow didn't move from his post, his growl never fading as Evelyn stood frozen, rain streaking her face. Her expression was unreadable, rage, desperation, or perhaps, for a flicker of a second, the recognition that she had lost. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tableau in stark, almost biblical detail. A father clutching his children, a dog standing guard, and a woman alone in the storm, mask torn away. Daniel looked up at Evelyn, his voice hoarse but firm. "It's over, Evelyn." "It ends here." She shook her head slowly, raindrops flicking from her hair, her lips curling into something between a snarl and a plea. "You don't understand. They're mine. They've always been mine." But the girls' cries, their trembling bodies pressed tight against Daniel, told the truth Evelyn couldn't face. They had chosen. They had leapt into the storm, rather than stay with her. The rain poured harder, as if the sky itself wanted to wash everything clean. Shadow's growl dropped into silence, though his stance remained firm, eyes never leaving Evelyn. Daniel tightened his hold on the girls, his own tears indistinguishable from the rain on his face. "No," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They're not yours. Not anymore." And with that, father, daughters, and dog stood together in the storm, a fragile but unbreakable unit, while Evelyn's figure seemed to shrink beneath the weight of thunder rolling above. The escape had been reckless, desperate, terrifying. But it worked. The girls had found their courage, and Daniel had found them. And nothing Evelyn did from this moment on could ever erase that. The storm had not relented. Rain lashed sideways, the wind howling through the trees as though the forest itself bore witness to the chaos unfolding on the narrow service road. Evelyn's SUV idled crookedly, headlights slicing through the curtain of water, casting wild shadows over the trembling children clinging to their father. Daniel's arms locked tight around Grace and Lily, his heart pounding so violently it felt as though his ribs might break. Their sobs shook against his chest, hot and alive against the cold rain. He wanted to never let go, but Evelyn was still there, standing just beyond the beam of the headlights, soaked, wild-eyed, her hair clinging to her face like a mask half torn away. Her gaze flicked to the SUV, engine humming, door still ajar. The vehicle was her leverage, her last weapon. If she could get to it, she could take them again. She lunged. Daniel saw the motion too late, his legs heavy with mud, children pressed against him. He shouted, "No!" And then Shadow moved. The German shepherd's body, though worn and marked by scars, launched forward with a ferocity that split the night. His limp was there, an old injury that slowed him in moments of rest, but adrenaline burned it away. He surged past Daniel, a dark streak of wet fur and flashing teeth, placing himself squarely between Evelyn and the SUV. His paws hit the gravel with a spray of mud, claws digging deep. His growl rose, not the low, warning rumble of before, but something primal, a thunderous declaration that reverberated even above the storm. It was not just a sound. It was a line drawn in the earth. Evelyn froze mid-stride, skidding back a half step as the dog's eyes bore into hers, molten gold in the glare of the headlights. The SUV sat just beyond him, but Shadow made it clear she would not reach it. Grace and Lily gasped against Daniel's chest. Grace whispered, almost in awe, "He's protecting us." Daniel's throat tightened. He knew. He had always known. But seeing it now, Shadow's battered body braced against the storm, his loyalty unshaken. It felt like watching the embodiment of everything Evelyn had never understood about love. Evelyn's hands shook at her sides. She laughed, high-pitched, a sound too fragile to survive the storm. "It's just a dog," she spat, though her voice cracked on the word. "He's nothing compared to me." But the tremor in her stance betrayed her. She wasn't facing just a dog. She was facing the one soul who had endured the worst of human cruelty and still chose to stand for what was right. Shadow wasn't nothing. He was everything. Daniel shifted the girls behind him, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. "You won't take them," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Not now. Not ever." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She looked at the SUV again, her desperation clawing through the storm. She darted left, then right, trying to feint past Shadow. The shepherd lunged each time, snapping the air, his growls deepening, his body a shield of fur and muscle. He moved like a warrior, refusing to let his injuries define him, every ounce of loyalty forged into strength. The girls clung to Daniel, their fear giving way to something else, wonder. In Shadow's stance, in his charge, they saw not just a protector, but family. The headlights flickered as thunder cracked overhead, bathing the scene in stark flashes of white. Evelyn stood drenched, trembling, her breath ragged. "They're mine," she shouted into the storm, voice almost swallowed by the wind. "You can't erase me. I gave them life." Daniel's reply was quiet, but carried with weight. "And you almost destroyed it." Lightning illuminated Shadow's body. Mud splattered across his legs, fur plastered to his frame, but his head held high, tail rigid, teeth bared. He didn't waver. Not for pain, not for rain, not for Evelyn's madness. He was a wall no storm could topple. Evelyn's composure cracked. She screamed and rushed forward one last time, her feet slipping in the mud as she lunged toward the SUV door. Shadow charged. Despite the limp, despite the ache in his body, he sprang forward with everything he had left. His chest collided with Evelyn's legs, knocking her sideways into the mud with a guttural cry. The impact wasn't brutal, but it was enough. Enough to halt her, enough to end the chase. Evelyn lay sprawled, mud streaking her face, hair tangled, eyes wide with disbelief. For once, she wasn't the woman who controlled the narrative, who twisted lies into masks of respectability. She was simply beaten by truth, by loyalty, by the dog she had underestimated. Daniel hurried forward, keeping the girls tight against him, Shadow circling Evelyn with a growl that warned her not to rise again. For a moment, time stilled. The storm roared. The forest bent under the wind, but in that clearing, everything had shifted. Shadow limped back to Daniel's side, pressing against him, against the children. His body shook with exhaustion, but his eyes, those fierce, unyielding eyes, never left Evelyn. He had made his stand, and it had turned the tide. Daniel sank to his knees, clutching his daughters, his free hand finding Shadow's wet fur, gripping tight. "You saved them," he whispered, voice breaking. "You saved all of us." Grace buried her face into Shadow's neck, sobbing into his drenched coat. Lily followed, wrapping her tiny arms around the dog who had leapt through storms, pain, and fear to protect them. Shadow leaned into them, steady, unyielding, a living barrier between the innocence of children and the chaos of those who would harm them. Evelyn lay motionless for a long beat, then pushed herself up onto her knees, mud dripping from her hands. Her eyes were wild, her voice hoarse. "This isn't over," she rasped, but even she seemed unsure if she believed it. Daniel rose slowly, shielding his daughters behind him. "Yes, Evelyn, it is." Shadow growled once more, low and final, as if punctuating Daniel's words. The storm began to ease, as though the sky itself had chosen sides. The rain softened, the wind pulling back into ragged breaths. The world felt quieter, though the weight of what had just happened lingered like an aftershock. Daniel held his daughters close, Shadow pressed against their legs, Evelyn hunched in defeat before them. And in that fragile, rain-soaked silence, it became clear. This night had been the breaking point. Shadow's charge had shifted everything. And the girls had chosen life over fear. Daniel had stood unbroken. And Shadow, scarred but resolute, had proven what Evelyn could never understand. Love wasn't control, and loyalty could never be bought. It was earned. It was live. It was everything. The Forest Service road was swallowed by mud and shadows, headlights flickering through sheets of rain. Daniel's chest heaved as he clutched his daughters close. Shadow pressed protectively against them, his body trembling from both exhaustion and unyielding vigilance. Evelyn knelt in the mud, hair plastered across her face, her breath sharp and uneven. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the storm. Then came something else. A low rumble in the distance. Tires grinding against gravel. Beams of light breaking through the curtain of rain. Daniel looked up. Relief and fear collided inside him. Help was coming, but so was judgment. The flashing red and blue glow carved through the darkness as a patrol truck crested the bend. Brakes squealed against the wet road, headlights catching the chaos. A man clutching 2 children, a woman caked in mud, and a German shepherd standing like a sentinel. "Sheriff's Department," a voice bellowed over the storm. 2 uniformed officers leapt out, rain soaking their jackets instantly. Their eyes swept the scene, taking in every detail in seconds. The distraught children, the wild-eyed woman, the protective dog with bared teeth. Daniel raised a shaking hand. "Here! We're here!" His voice cracked, torn between desperation and exhaustion. The officers moved quickly. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a lined face that carried years of weariness, strode toward Daniel. "Sir, are you Daniel Hayes?" Daniel nodded, rain dripping from his hair, his arms tightening around his daughters. "Yes, please. This is my ex-wife. She tried to take them." Evelyn's head snapped up. Her eyes blazed, her voice ragged. "They're mine. He has no right." But her words were cut short by the shepherd's growl. Shadow stepped forward, his body bristling, placing himself squarely between Evelyn and the officers. The second deputy approached cautiously, his hand resting on his holster, but eyes steady on the dog. "Easy there, boy. We're not here to hurt anyone." Daniel placed a trembling hand on Shadow's back. "He's protecting the girls. He won't let anyone take them again." The deputy nodded, voice low, respectful. "Understood." The broad-shouldered officer turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, stand up. Hands where I can see them." Evelyn staggered to her feet, mud sliding from her palms. She shook her head, wet strands of hair whipping around her face. "You don't understand. He turned them against me. I'm their mother." "Ma'am, you need to stop talking," the deputy cut in firmly. "You're under arrest for attempted abduction and violating a custody order. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Her eyes went wide, her voice shrill. "No! You can't take them from me. They're all I have left." Her protest dissolved into sobs as the deputy guided her arms back, cold metal cuffs clicking shut in the rhythm of finality. The storm swallowed her cries, blending them into the night until they were nothing more than echoes. Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His knees buckled, and he sank to the mud, still cradling the girls. Grace clung to his shirt, trembling. Lily, smaller but fierce in her own way, slipped from his arms and dropped to her knees beside Shadow. The shepherd, soaked and weary, lowered himself into the mud as if his body could no longer carry the weight of the night. Yet when Lily's arms wrapped around his neck, when her cheek pressed into his drenched fur, he found strength to lift his head. Her voice was barely audible over the storm, but Daniel heard it. The officers heard it. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Her small hand clutched his collar, as though anchoring herself to the only constant in a night that had spun wildly out of control. Shadow's ears twitched, his body relaxing under her touch. He didn't need words. His presence was enough. The deputy knelt beside Daniel, lowering his voice. "Are you and the children hurt?" Daniel shook his head, though his voice trembled. "No, just shaken. She almost—" He couldn't finish the thought. His hand found Shadow's fur again, gripping tightly as though the dog were the only thing keeping him grounded. If it weren't for him— The officer followed his gaze, studying the shepherd for a long moment. Respect softened his features. Looks like he knew his duty. Daniel swallowed hard, emotions threatening to break. He's more than duty. He's family. The officers guided Evelyn toward the patrol truck, her protests weakening with every step. She glanced back once, mud-streaked, eyes burning, but the sight that met her was immovable. Daniel holding his daughters, Shadow pressed against them like an unbreakable wall. There was no room for her in that picture. Not anymore. As the patrol lights pulsed against the trees, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. The storm began to ease, rain softening into mist, the wind sighing instead of screaming. It felt as though the world itself was letting go, just as they were. Grace leaned into Daniel's chest. Lily refused to release Shadow, whispering something only he could hear. His tail gave a faint wag, the only movement he seemed capable of, but it was enough to make her smile through her tears. Daniel brushed wet hair from Lily's face, his voice breaking. "You're safe now. Both of you. We're safe." For the first time in years, he almost believed it. The deputies returned, one of them placing a steady hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We'll take you all back to town, get you someplace warm. But first, I think your dog deserves a ride too." Daniel managed a broken laugh, looking down at Shadow. "He's earned more than that tonight." The shepherd lifted his head, ears perked despite the fatigue. His eyes glowed in the patrol lights, steadfast, unyielding, alive. In that moment, Daniel knew with absolute certainty, whatever storms came, they would weather them together. And so, on a rain-slick forest road, with sirens fading into the distance and the worst behind them, a father, 2 daughters, and a battered but loyal shepherd began their walk towards something Evelyn could never claim, a future built not on fear, but on love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a family and the dog who had saved them. Marlene sat at her kitchen table long past midnight, storm whispering at the windows. Papers lay scattered. Lily's shaky sketches, therapy notes, taped sessions replayed until the children's voices etched themselves into her mind. One drawing showed a dark road, a car, and a dog shielding 2 small figures. "You drew what you saw, sweetheart," Marlene murmured. Next to it, the recorder crackled. Lily's soft voice. "She said we were going home, but it wasn't home." Shadow knew. He barked and growled. He wouldn't let her. Each word was both dagger and lifeline. Healing had become testimony. Marlene gathered the sketches, notes, and tapes into a folder. Rumors already swirled through Oak Ridge, whispers of custody battles, dangerous dogs, unstable children. But whispers fade. Truth, documented and undeniable, could endure. At the sheriff's office, she handed the deputy the satchel. "Not evidence," she corrected softly. "Testimony. The kind children give when no one else is listening." The Oak Ridge County Courthouse smelled of old wood and rain. Inside, tension pressed heavily. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, Shadow at his feet, every muscle taut. Across the room, Evelyn was immaculate, her mask restored. Lisa, steady as steel, opened. "This isn't just custody. It's safety. Whether 2 girls can be free from manipulation and harm." Evelyn countered smoothly. I am their mother. Daniel has filled their heads with fear. And that dog, her eyes flicked with disdain, is dangerous. The first hours dragged through records and Evelyn's polished notes. For a while, her composure seemed to sway the room. Then Lisa rose with Exhibit C, Lily's drawings. The judge examined page after page. Dark roads, storm rain, a car with screaming stick figures, shadows drawn larger than the danger itself, crayons cut deeper than testimony. The room stilled. They're children's doodles, Evelyn scoffed. Crayons cannot be evidence. Lisa's voice cut through. Not doodles, accounts, consistent with therapy notes and recordings. Fear given shape on paper. The judge studied one drawing, shadow towering as a shield in the storm. He looked over his glasses. Sometimes truth does not come wrapped in legalese. Sometimes it comes from the trembling hand of a child explaining why she was afraid. Evelyn's mask cracked. The gallery murmured, recognition shifting the tide. After recess, the storm outside thinned to drizzle. The judge's voice was solemn. This case is not merely custody, but trust, Ms. Hayes. You presented control, not care. What this court has seen is a pattern of manipulation and disregard for safety. He paused, the silence charged. On emotional abuse and attempted abduction, this court finds you guilty. Gasps rippled. Evelyn's face hardened, her fingers trembling. The judge continued. You will serve 18 months custodial supervision, followed by psychiatric treatment. Custody of Lily and Grace remains with their father. Effective immediately. Evelyn spat bitterly. You're stealing them from me. No, Ms. Hayes, the judge replied evenly. You did that yourself. The gavel struck. Final. Daniel sat frozen. It wasn't triumph, but release. A breath not jagged with dread. Evelyn was led out, her eyes flickering once toward the space her daughters should have been, then gone. As the gallery dispersed, townsfolk passed Daniel with quiet nods, some patting Shadow's head, whispering hero, protector. Lisa gathered the children's drawings carefully. They'll ask about them, Daniel murmured. Let them, she said. Sometimes truth doesn't come in polished sentences. Sometimes it comes in crayon. Daniel knelt to Shadow, the shepherd pressing his nose to his chest. You did it, he whispered. You kept them safe. Shadow blinked, calm and steady. When they stepped outside, the drizzle lifted. A shaft of sunlight broke the clouds. The courthouse steps glistened. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But for the first time in months, Daniel felt they weren't walking into a storm. They were walking home. The first signs of spring lingered in the air, soft breezes carrying the scent of thawed earth, blossoms waiting to wake. For the first time in months, the Hayes home no longer felt like a battlefield, but like a place learning to breathe again. Streamers dangled unevenly from the ceiling. A hand-painted banner read, Happy Birthday, Lily Grace. Daniel's brushstrokes crooked, imperfect, and perfect. On the table sat a lopsided cake covered in fingerprints of sugar and strawberries. The smell of vanilla filled the room. Shadow sat nearby, a paper hat perched askew on his head. He tolerated it, though his amber eyes gave Daniel a long-suffering look that made the girls shriek with laughter. Their giggles echoed louder than any courtroom gavel. When the candles were lit, Daniel rested his hands on his daughter's shoulders. Ready? He whispered. 2 sets of cheeks puffed. 2 hearts beat together. The flames went out, and cheers filled the room. Grace clapping, Lily laughing, Shadow barking as if he too had joined the wish. Plates smeared with frosting, tiny hands sticky with sugar, Shadow lapping at his own slice of ice cream with a biscuit crown. Every detail was proof that survival had turned into life. Later, the girls collapsed in a heap beside the shepherd, his tail thumping as their arms wrapped tight around his neck. "Best birthday ever," Grace whispered. Daniel stood in the doorway, his throat tight. This was why he had fought. To see them laugh without fear. To see them safe in Shadow's embrace. That night, as the crooked banner swayed in the breeze, Lily lingered awake, fingers tracing circles in Shadow's fur. Her eyes caught Daniel's. For months, silence had hung heavy between them. But then she leaned forward. "Daddy," she whispered. The single word shattered the silence. Daniel cupped her cheek, his own voice breaking. "I'm here, Lily. Always." She threw her arms around his neck, clinging fiercely. Not in fear, but in need. Grace stirred and joined, pressing close. Daniel held them both, his daughters, his whole world. Shadow lowered his head onto Daniel's knee, bearing witness in steady silence. "We're safe now?" Lily asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Daniel promised, brushing Grace's hair. "Safe. Together. No one will take you away again." Shadow gave a soft huff, sealing the vow. Imperfect, messy, but real. Family. Days later, Daniel sat in Marlene's cabin, the fire burning low. Emma leaned against the wall, Marlene with her notes spread open, Shadow resting by the door. Daniel's voice was rough. "I keep thinking, if this happened to us, it's happening to other families too. Not everyone has this circle. What if there was a place, not cold offices or case files, a house, warm, safe, where kids like mine could laugh again? We could call it Haven House." The name hung in the air. Emma moved closer, her voice steady. "You're serious?" "I've never been more," Daniel admitted. "I don't know about funding, logistics, but I know what it felt like when no one believed me. I don't want another father or child to feel that emptiness." Emma's hand rested on his. "That emptiness is exactly why it can work, and you're not alone." Marlene's eyes glistened. "For years I've kept sketches, therapy notes, whispers too fragile for court. They felt like burdens. Maybe they're seeds. If you start Haven House, you'll have my support." The fire popped softly. For the first time, Daniel's dream felt possible. Shadow stirred, padding over to press against him. Emma's gaze softened. "You already have the first resident, a survivor who found his way back because someone refused to give up." Daniel scratched behind Shadow's ear. "Yeah, boy." "You're proof it can be done." Marlene asked, "Why Cedar Hollow?" "Because it's quiet. Because trust can grow there. It's where we began to heal. I want that for others." Emma nodded. "One house, one room. That's how movements start. Don't think 20 years from now. Think about tomorrow. Tomorrow." The word settled like a vow. When Daniel left, rain had eased to mist. Lily and Grace slept in the back seat, their heads touching. He paused at Marlene's porch light, feeling the seed take root. One room in Cedar Hollow. It didn't sound small anymore. It sounded like a beginning. The first hints of summer drifted through Cedar Hollow. Pines warming in the sun, wildflowers rising, laughter spilling from the farmhouse. Children ran barefoot across the yard, their shouts echoing like bells. Fear no longer hid in corners. Shadow moved among them, his muzzle grayer now, stride slower but sure. He circled the yard like a sentinel, accepting pats on his back as children darted past. Guardian, not warrior. From the porch, Daniel watched with a small, steady smile. His daughters wove among the others, sleeves dusted with flour from baking cookies in the kitchen. 2 new arrivals, one boy shy, one girl silent, had been coaxed into stirring dough by Lily and Grace until the girl laughed for the first time. Marlene and Emma exchanged glances at the doorway, eyes bright with pride. Later, the children swarmed a tray of crooked cookies. Daniel knelt when the quiet girl whispered, "Thank you." He brushed her hair gently. "You're safe here. Always." As the sun lowered, Daniel strummed his guitar, voices rising until the yard sang. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching. He didn't understand the melody, but he knew its meaning. Freedom. He laid his head on his paws, content. That night, embers glowed low in the hearth. Daniel traced the scars on his hands, each one a map of survival. Emma entered with chamomile tea, her presence steady. They spoke of scars, not whispers of pain, but reminders of strength. "Maybe they're what keep us standing," Daniel said. Shadow stirred, his limp more pronounced, his body slower now. Daniel stroked his scarred ear. Every mark saved a life, including mine. Emma's hand brushed his wrist. Not a promise, but presence. Daniel let it stay. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine not just surviving, but living forward. Evening settled soft over Cedar Hollow. The girls finished their play beneath the pines. Emma sat on the porch with cocoa steaming. Daniel watched as Shadow made his slow, square rounds, checking posts, sniffing grass, then lifting his head toward him. All quiet. Another day secured. Inside, the family gathered by the fire. The crooked birthday banner still hung above the mantel, beside a Polaroid of 4 smiles, and Shadow in a paper hat. Laughter bubbled as Lily teased about burnt cookies, Grace declaring Shadow ate them first. His tail thumped once, as if in agreement. The girls slid to the rug, curling against the shepherd. Daniel joined them, Shadow's head finding his knee. Emma reached across, palm open, and Daniel set his hand in hers. No ceremony. Just proof they had built a place where fear no longer ruled. Then Shadow rose, slow but steady, and turned to the open door. He squared himself and barked once. Strong, clean. Not alarm, not warning. Declaration. I am here. The watch continues. The sound rolled through the farmhouse and out across the yard like a bell. The fire seemed to settle in answer. Daniel's throat tightened. He knew it was not an ending, but a chapter mark, a naming of what they had survived. Shadow returned to the hearth. 4 hands reached for him at once. He exhaled deeply, finished with the day's work, surrounded by those he had kept safe. Daniel leaned close, cheek against his crown. You taught me loyalty means never leaving. Shadow pressed harder into his knee, the smallest reply. You learned it. The house quieted to breath and fire. Upstairs, new children dreamed in peace. The scars remained, but they no longer dictated the story. They confirmed survival. Outside, the night gathered in the pines. Inside, Haven House held its warmth. Man, daughters, dog, and those who had joined them. Not perfect, not finished, but enough. The watch went on. The bark would be there when needed, and the door, at last, opened inward. In the end, what lingers is simple: love, loyalty, and the quiet comfort of knowing that some bonds never break. A German Shepherd's devotion isn't just protection. It's a kind of steady heartbeat that reminds us we are never truly alone. Dogs don't ask for perfection, they ask for presence. And in return, they give us a trust so deep it can carry us through storms we never thought we'd survive. If reading this made you think about your own four-legged companion, maybe take a moment tonight to sit with them, hand on their fur, and just breathe together. That's where the healing lives. In those small, ordinary moments that are really anything but ordinary. And if you'd like to explore ways to deepen that connection, I know of a gentle resource that many dog lovers have found meaningful. It's not flashy, just thoughtful guidance on strengthening the bond we're lucky enough to share. No pressure, of course. Think of it as something a friend passes along because they know how much your dog already means to you. Sometimes the best journeys begin with a simple nudge.